breaking the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom turned his back on one of his own. London. Tonight, the nation watches a national inquiry. 9,000 cases, 15 years of silence, and Sir Sadiq Khan, the man who runs the city, is standing alone inside Downing Street. Less than 48 hours ago, Sir Keir Starmer made a decision that could ignite the most explosive political crisis London has seen in a generation. He announced a grooming gangs inquiry, national in scope, uncompromising in reach, and then in front of cameras, journalists, and a holding its breath nation, he said something that shattered the fragile alliance between Number 10 and City Hall. We will leave no stone unturned. Wherever it is, in London or elsewhere, the room went silent, because everyone knew what those words meant. This wasn't just about towns in the north anymore. This was about the capital. This was about the mayor. This was about Sadiq Khan. If you want the full story, if you want to understand what just detonated at the heart of British politics, hit subscribe now. Because what you're about to hear could reshape the future of London itself. At 3:47 p.m. yesterday, the Prime Minister walked into that press briefing, and within 12 minutes he had ignited a firestorm that has left the Mayor of London cornered, the Conservative opposition emboldened, and millions of Londoners demanding answers. This is the story of how it all unraveled. To understand why yesterday's announcement shook Britain to its core, you have to go back. Not months, years, because this isn't a story that began in Downing Street. It began in the shadows, in the cases that were never fully investigated, in the voices that were never fully heard. For over a decade, grooming gangs operating across England became one of the most toxic, painful wounds in British society. Towns like Rotherham, Rochdale, Telford, Oxford, names that now carry the weight of systemic failure, where thousands of vulnerable children were exploited, abused, and abandoned by the very institutions meant to protect them. Inquiries were launched, reports were written, heads rolled in police departments and social services. The nation reeled. Politicians promised it would never happen again, but there was always one glaring exception in the national conversation: London, the capital, home to nearly 9 million people, governed by the Metropolitan Police, overseen by Mayor Sadiq Khan, remained curiously absent from the narrative, and that absence didn't go unnoticed. For years, Conservative politicians, led by London Assembly member Susan Hall, demanded answers. How many grooming gang cases existed in London? Were they being investigated? Were victims being ignored? Hall asked Khan directly, again, and again, and again. Each time, the mayor's response was the same. London's cases were more complex, the dynamics were different. The term grooming gangs didn't apply in the same way to his critics. It sounded like evasion. To survivors watching from across the country, it felt like denial. Then, in late October 2025, the floodgates opened. The Metropolitan Police quietly announced they were reviewing approximately 9,000 cases of child sexual exploitation spanning 15 years. 9,000 cases. The number hit like a freight train. Suddenly, the mayor's reassurances felt hollow. His careful language felt like a shield. And the question that had been simmering for years erupted into a national demand. What has Sadiq Khan been hiding? Conservative voices pounced. Nigel Farage accused Khan of denying the existence of grooming gangs in the capital. Susan Hall said he was taking the mickey out of victims. Even grooming gang survivors began speaking out, saying the mayor was fooling himself if he believed London was immune. Khan fired back. He directed the Met to leave no stone unturned. He announced £2.4 million in funding for victim support. He insisted he had always taken child exploitation seriously. But the damage was done, because the political optics were devastating. A Labour mayor in a Labour-run capital appearing to downplay or deflect questions about one of the most sensitive crimes in modern British history, and all of this was unfolding while his own party leader, Prime Minister Keir Starmer, was under mounting pressure to launch a national inquiry. Starmer had delayed. He'd resisted calls from the opposition. He'd said existing safeguards were sufficient, but the pressure kept building. Survivor groups demanded action. The media hammered him daily. Even within his own party, whispers grew louder. If Labour didn't act, they'd look complicit. Then came the leak. Sources inside Downing Street told journalists that Starmer was preparing to announce a major inquiry. It would be sweeping. It would be national. It would finally confront the grooming gangs crisis head-on. But here's the twist. The inquiry wouldn't just focus on the towns where grooming gangs were already infamous. It would include everywhere, every region, every authority, including London. And that's when Sadiq Khan realized he had a problem, Because if the Prime Minister, his own colleague, his own party leader publicly stated that London needed investigating, it would be the ultimate political humiliation. It would validate every accusation his critics had made. It would shatter his credibility. Khan tried to get ahead of it. In interviews, he emphasized his cooperation with police. He pointed to the Met's review. He said justice would be served, but it wasn't enough. Because on November 21, 2025, just 2 days ago, Keir Starmer stood in front of the press and made the announcement that has now consumed British politics, a national inquiry into grooming gangs, comprehensive, unflinching, and crucially unmistakably aimed at London. We will leave no stone unturned, Starmer said, wherever it is, in London or elsewhere. The words were deliberate. The message was clear. The Prime Minister had just thrown his own mayor under the bus, and London erupted. The fallout was immediate. Within minutes of Starmer's announcement, social media exploded. #London Inquiry trended across the United Kingdom. News alerts pinged on millions of phones. Television networks cut to breaking news banners, and in City Hall, the gleaming glass structure on the south bank of the Thames where Sadiq Khan governs, the mood turned to disbelief. Sources inside the mayor's office said Khan watched a press conference live. He'd known the inquiry was coming, but he hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected Starmer to name London so explicitly, to single out the capital, to publicly undermine him in front of the entire nation. One aide described it as a gut punch. Another called it political assassination. Because this wasn't just policy, this was personal. Starmer and Khan had worked together for years. They were both Labour, both represented progressive values. Both had built their careers fighting for justice and equality. But now the Prime Minister had publicly declared that the mayor's handling of child exploitation cases warranted investigation. The Conservative opposition smelled blood. Susan Hall, the Tory leader in the London Assembly who'd spent years demanding answers from Khan, issued a statement within the hour. Finally, she said, the truth will come out. For too long, the mayor has stonewalled. He's evaded. He's dismissed the concerns of victims and their families. Today, the Prime Minister did what Sadiq Khan refused to do. He put London's children first. Her words were sharp, calculated, devastating, and they resonated. On talk radio, callers flooded the lines. Some defended Khan. They said he'd been dealt an impossible hand, inheriting a Met Police with deep institutional problems, navigating a city with over 9 million people, managing complex cases that didn't fit neat categories. But others were furious. 9,000 cases, one caller said, her voice shaking. 9,000. And he stood there month after month telling us London was different. How is it different? Children were hurt. Children were failed. And he acted like it didn't exist. Another caller, a man who identified himself as a social worker in East London, said he'd seen the warning signs for years. We flagged cases, he said. We reported patterns. And nothing happened. The system swallowed them. And when we asked questions, we were told it was being handled. But was it? Was it really? The anger wasn't confined to phone lines. Outside City Hall, a small crowd began to gather. By evening, it had grown to hundreds. Protesters held signs. Justice for London's children. Khan must answer. No more cover-ups. Some were survivors of child exploitation from other parts of the country. They traveled to London because they said this moment mattered. Because if the capital could finally be held accountable, maybe, just maybe, it would send a message that no authority was above scrutiny. One woman, her face partially obscured by a scarf, spoke to a television crew. I was abused in Rotherham, she said quietly. For years, people told me it wasn't happening, that I was lying, that I was exaggerating. And then the truth came out. And I thought, finally, people will believe us. But then I watched London ignore the same questions. And it felt like it was happening all over again. Like we didn't matter. Her voice cracked. Today, she said, I feel like maybe someone's finally listening. Inside Parliament, the political tremors intensified. Conservative MPs tabled urgent questions. They demanded to know when the inquiry would begin, who would lead it, what its terms of reference would be, and crucially whether Sadiq Khan himself would be called to testify. Labour MPs tried to rally around their embattled mayor. They pointed out that Khan had directed the Met to review those 9,000 cases, that he'd allocated funding for victims, that he'd repeatedly said he wanted justice, but their defenses sounded thin. Because the optics were inescapable, a Labour Prime Minister had just greenlit an investigation into a Labour mayor. One Labour backbencher, speaking anonymously to a journalist, admitted the situation was a nightmare. "This makes us look divided," the MP said. "It makes us look like we don't have our house in order. And worst of all, it makes us look like we ignored children to protect one of our own." The media feeding frenzy reached fever pitch. Tabloids ran brutal front pages. Khan's shame screamed when headline. PM turns on mayor declared another. Broadsheets published op-eds dissecting Starmer's political calculation. Was this a principled stand, or a ruthless move to insulate himself from criticism? Television debates became shouting matches. Pundits clashed over whether Khan had genuinely failed, or whether he was being scapegoated for systemic failures that predated his tenure. Nigel Farage appeared on multiple news programs, hammering the same message. This is what happens when political correctness stops people from telling the truth. Sadiq Khan didn't want to admit there was a problem in London because it didn't fit his narrative. And now we're finding out the cost of that denial. Khan's defenders pushed back hard. They accused the opposition of weaponizing a tragedy for political gain. They pointed out that child exploitation was a national crisis, not just a London crisis. That every police force, every council, every authority had blind spots. But the accusations kept coming. And then at 6:13 p.m. yesterday, Sadiq Khan himself broke his silence. He released a statement. It was measured, carefully worded, but beneath the professional tone, you could feel the tension. "I welcome the Prime Minister's inquiry," Khan wrote. "I have always been clear that justice for victims of child exploitation must be our absolute priority. The Metropolitan Police is conducting a comprehensive review of historic cases, and I have directed them to cooperate fully with any national investigation," he continued. "London is a complex city. Our cases involve diverse circumstances: familial abuse, peer-on-peer exploitation, institutional failures, and yes, organized group-based crimes. I have never denied this. What I have said is that we must be precise in our language, thorough in our investigations, and relentless in our pursuit of justice." It was a defensive statement. And the public noticed. On Twitter, critics dissected every sentence. "He's still deflecting," one user wrote. "He still won't say the words grooming gangs," another posted. "This statement reads like a lawyer wrote it. Where's the anger? Where's the passion? Where's the promise that heads will roll if children were failed?" By nightfall, London felt like a city at war with itself. In the east, communities debated in mosques and community centers, some defending Khan as a man caught in an impossible political crossfire, others demanding he take full responsibility. In the west, affluent neighborhoods discussed a scandal over dinner tables, grappling with uncomfortable questions about whether they'd turned a blind eye because the exploitation didn't touch their children. In the south, activists organized vigils for victims, lighting candles, reading names, demanding that the inquiry deliver more than just political theater. And in the north, ordinary Londoners exhausted by years of political drama simply asked, will this inquiry actually change anything? Or is this just another scandal that'll be forgotten in 6 months? The Metropolitan Police, meanwhile, found itself under intense scrutiny. Commander Claire Kelland, the Met's public protection lead, gave a statement attempting to reassure the public. She emphasized that the force took child exploitation extremely seriously, that every allegation was investigated, that the 9,000 cases under review represented a thorough examination of historic records, not necessarily 9,000 active grooming gang cases. But her clarification barely registered, because the number 9,000 had already lodged itself in the national consciousness, and no amount of context could dislodge it. As midnight approached, the protests outside City Hall finally dispersed. The television cameras packed up. The reporters filed their final stories of the day, but the tension didn't dissipate, because everyone knew this was just the beginning. Tomorrow, Khan would face the London Assembly. He'd be questioned, challenged, forced to defend his record in granular detail, and in the coming weeks, the inquiry would be formalized. Terms would be set. Witnesses would be called. The storm wasn't passing. It was just gathering strength. Morning broke over London like a held breath. November 22nd, 2025. The day Sadiq Khan would face the fire. At 10 o'clock am, the London Assembly chamber filled to capacity. Every seat occupied. Journalists lined the walls. Cameras positioned at every angle. This wasn't a routine session. This was a reckoning. Khan arrived flanked by advisors. His expression was neutral, practiced, controlled. But those who knew him well said they could see it. The exhaustion, the strain, the weight of a man who'd spent the night knowing that everything he'd built over nearly a decade as mayor was about to be scrutinized, dissected, and potentially destroyed. Susan Hall sat across from him. Her posture was upright. her gaze unwavering. She'd waited years for this moment. The session began with procedural formalities. But no one was listening. Everyone was waiting for the question. And then it came. Hall leaned forward into her microphone. "Mr. Mayor," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "For 3 years I have asked you a simple question. How many grooming gang cases are there in London? For 3 years, you have refused to give a straight answer. You've called the cases complex. You've said the term grooming gangs doesn't apply here. You've deflected. You've dismissed. You've denied." She paused. The room was silent. "But now," she continued, "we know the truth. 9,000 cases. 15 years. Under your watch. Under Labour's watch. So I'm going to ask you one more time, and this time, the whole country is watching. Did you ignore grooming gangs in London to protect your political image?" The chamber erupted. Labour Assembly members shouted objections. Conservative members demanded Khan answer. The chairperson banged the gavel, calling for order. Khan remained still. His jaw tightened. His hands rested flat on the table in front of him. When the noise subsided, he leaned into his microphone. "I have never," he said, each word deliberate, "ignored victims. I have never prioritized politics over the safety of children. What I have done, what I will continue to do, is ensure that we approach this issue with accuracy, with precision, and with the seriousness it deserves." Hall wasn't satisfied. "That's not an answer," she shot back. "That's a speech. Answer the question. Did grooming gangs operate in London while you told the public they didn't exist?" Khan's voice hardened. "The Metropolitan Police has confirmed that tens of group-based child sexual exploitation cases are under investigation. I have directed them to leave no stone unturned. I have allocated funding. I have cooperated with every inquiry. But what I will not do, what I refuse to do, is reduce the suffering of thousands of children to a political soundbite." "Then why," Hall pressed, "did you spend years saying London was different? Why did you avoid the term grooming gangs? Why did it take a prime minister from your own party publicly calling you out before you finally admitted there was a problem?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Khan looked down. For just a moment, the mask slipped. He looked tired, human, cornered. "Because," he said quietly, "London is different. Not in the sense that exploitation doesn't happen here, it does, and it's appalling. But in the sense that the patterns, the demographics, the structures are not identical to Rotherham or Rochdale. We have familial abuse, peer-on-peer abuse, online exploitation, institutional abuse, and yes, organized groups. All of it matters. All of it demands justice. But if we use imprecise language, if we paint every case with the same brush, we risk missing the nuances that could help us prevent future harm." It was a thoughtful answer, a reasonable answer, but in the court of public opinion, it sounded like an excuse. The session continued for 2 hours. Question after question, attack after defense. Khan held his ground, but he was bleeding politically. Every careful answer reinforced a perception that he was more interested in managing narratives than confronting hard truths. At one point, a Labour Assembly member tried to shift the focus, pointing out that child exploitation predated Khan's tenure, that the Met's failures went back decades, that successive governments had underfunded social services, but the public wasn't interested in context anymore. They wanted accountability. They wanted someone to say, "I failed, we failed, and it stops now." Khan never said those words, and that silence, that refusal to fully capitulate, became the story. By the time the session ended, the hashtag Khan must resign was trending outside. The protests had returned, louder this time, angrier. One protester, a young woman holding a sign that read "Believe Survivors," shouted into a megaphone, "He talks about nuance while children suffered. He talks about complexity while victims were ignored. Enough excuses. Enough spin. We want justice." The crowd roared in agreement, but it wasn't just protesters. Ordinary Londoners, people who'd voted for Khan, people who'd defended him, were starting to waver. A taxi driver interviewed by a news crew said, "I used to back him. I thought he was good for London. But this feels like he's protecting himself instead of protecting kids. And that's unforgivable." A shop owner in Stratford said, "I don't know if he's guilty of a cover-up or just incompetent. But either way, I don't trust him anymore." A teacher in Hackney said, "We see the signs. We report concerns. And then nothing happens. Maybe it's not all Khan's fault, but someone has to take responsibility. Someone has to say this ends now." Inside Downing Street, Starmer's team monitored the fallout closely. The Prime Minister had taken a calculated risk. By publicly stating the inquiry would include London, he distanced himself from Khan. He'd protected Labour at the national level by sacrificing Labour at the city level. It was ruthless. But it was working. Polling data showed that while Khan's approval ratings were plummeting, Starmer's remained stable. Voters saw him as a leader willing to hold his own party accountable, but behind closed doors, Labour insiders were worried if Khan goes down. One senior advisor warned, it creates a power vacuum in London. And if the Conservatives take City Hall in the next election, we lose our flagship city. We lose our credibility as a party that can govern urban Britain, another aide countered. And if we defend Khan too loudly, we look like we're covering for him. We look complicit. Starmer made the right call. The debate raged within the party. Some wanted to quietly push Khan toward resignation. Others wanted to give him space to survive. But Khan himself had no intention of resigning. That evening, he gave a televised interview. It was his first extended appearance since Starmer's announcement. The interviewer didn't hold back. Mayor Khan, do you accept that you mishandled this issue? Khan paused. Then, I accept that more could have been done. That the system failed children. But I also believe that the response must be proportionate, accurate, and focused on delivering justice, not on political revenge. Do you regret saying London's cases were different? I regret, Khan said, that my words were interpreted as dismissive. That was never my intention. My intention was to ensure we understood the full scope of the problem so we could address it effectively. Will you cooperate fully with the inquiry? Absolutely. I have nothing to hide. And if the inquiry finds that cases were mishandled under your leadership, will you resign? Khan looked directly into the camera. If the inquiry finds systemic failures that I could have prevented, I will take full responsibility. But I will not be bullied into resigning based on political pressure and media hysteria. I was elected by the people of London, and I will continue to serve them until they decide otherwise. It was defiant. Some saw it as strength. Others saw it as arrogance. As the interview ended, one thing became clear. Sadiq Khan was not going quietly, and that meant the battle for London, for Labour, for the truth was far from over. Across the city, in living rooms and pubs and community halls, people debated late into the night. Was Khan a scapegoat or a failure? Was Starmer a leader or a traitor? Were the Conservatives exploiting tragedy or demanding justice? No one had easy answers, but everyone agreed on one thing. This wasn't just about politics anymore. This was about whether London, the capital of a nation that prided itself on justice and accountability, had truly protected its most vulnerable children, or whether, for 15 years, it had looked the other way. The city sleeps, but not soundly. London tonight is a place of unanswered questions, of fractured trust, of a political earthquake whose aftershocks will be felt for years. The lights of City Hall still glow across the Thames. Inside, staff work late preparing briefings, drafting statements, managing a crisis that shows no signs of ending. Sadiq Khan's office is dark, but sources say he left only an hour ago. Exhausted, embattled, but still standing. In Downing Street, the lights burn too. Keir Starmer's gamble has worked for now. He's insulated himself from the scandal, positioned himself as the leader willing to make hard choices. But his aides know the danger. If Khan falls, Labour's grip on London weakens. And if the inquiry uncovers failures that stretch beyond one mayor, if it reveals institutional rot that implicates the party itself, then no amount of political distance will save them. Across the capital, in neighbourhoods from Barking to Brent, from Croydon to Camden, ordinary Londoners lie awake with their own thoughts. Parents hold their children a little tighter tonight. Teachers wonder if they missed signs. Social workers question whether their reports were truly heard. Police officers ask themselves if they did enough or if the system they serve was designed to fail. And survivors, those who lived through exploitation, who carried the weight of trauma while the world moved on, they feel something they haven't felt in a long time. A flicker of hope. Because for the first time in years, the capital is being forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that child exploitation didn't just happen in distant northern towns. It happened here, in the heart of Britain. In the city that likes to think of itself as progressive, cosmopolitan, enlightened, but hope is fragile. Inquiries have been launched before, reports have been written, promises have been made, and yet the cycle continues. What makes this time different? Perhaps it's the scale. 9,000 cases, 15 years. Numbers so staggering they cannot be ignored, cannot be minimized, cannot be explained away. Perhaps it's the politics. A prime minister breaking ranks with his own mayor. A Conservative opposition smelling blood. A media landscape that won't let the story die, or perhaps it's something deeper. Perhaps Britain is finally tired of excuses, tired of institutional failures blamed on complexity, tired of politicians who prioritize perception over protection, tired of systems that seem built to shield the powerful while abandoning the vulnerable. The inquiry will take months, maybe years. Witnesses will testify, documents will be reviewed, patterns will emerge, and when it's over, Britain will have to decide what justice looks like. Does it mean resignations, prosecutions, systemic reform? Does it mean confronting uncomfortable truths about who was failed and why? Does it mean admitting that for too long, political calculations took precedence over the safety of children? Tonight, those questions have no answers, but they hang in the air over London like fog off the river. Sadiq Khan will face more battles, more hearings, more questions. His political future is uncertain. Some believe he'll survive, that he'll weather the storm as he's weathered others, emerging damaged but intact. Others believe this is the beginning of the end, that the inquiry will uncover failures too damning to excuse, and that his tenure will be remembered not for transport improvements or housing initiatives, but for this moment, this crisis, this reckoning. Keir Starmer, meanwhile, has bought himself time. He's shown he's willing to hold his own accountable, but he's also created a dangerous precedent. If one Labour mayor can be publicly undermined, others may wonder when their turn will come. Trust within the party has been shaken, loyalties have been tested, and the inquiry itself, it's only just beginning. Across Britain, other cities are now watching nervously. If London is being investigated, how long before the spotlight turns elsewhere? How many more cases are hidden in filing cabinets and forgotten databases? How many more children were failed by systems too broken to save them? The protesters outside City Hall have gone home. The television cameras have moved on to tomorrow's headlines. The news cycle will shift, it always does, but the scars remain for the survivors who finally feel heard, for the communities divided over who to blame, for the politicians navigating the wreckage of trust, and for London itself, a city forced to confront a version of its history it would rather forget. There's a phrase often repeated in British politics: sunlight is the best disinfectant. For 15 years, parts of London operated in shadow. Cases were logged but not always pursued. Voices were raised but not always heard. Concerns were noted but not always acted upon. Now, whether by political necessity or genuine moral awakening, the sunlight has finally arrived. What it reveals will be painful, uncomfortable, possibly devastating, but perhaps, just perhaps, it will also be transformative, because systems that fail children don't fix themselves. They require pressure, scrutiny, accountability. They require leaders willing to say, we failed, and we will do better. Whether Sadiq Khan is that leader remains to be seen. Whether Keir Starmer's inquiry delivers real justice or just political cover remains to be seen. Whether London and Britain can truly confront its failures and build something better remains to be seen. But tonight, in the quiet hours before dawn, the city holds its breath, waiting for answers, waiting for justice, waiting to see if this moment of crisis becomes a turning point, or just another chapter in a story of institutions that promised protection but delivered only regret. The Thames flows on, indifferent to politics and scandal, but the people, the survivors, the advocates, the parents, the voters, they are not indifferent. They are watching, they are waiting, and they are demanding that this time finally things must change. London tonight is not the city it was yesterday. And tomorrow, it may not be the city it is tonight, because when trust breaks, when systems fail, when children are abandoned by those meant to protect them, the only path forward is through the hard work of accountability. The inquiry will begin, the questions will be asked, the evidence will be examined, and Britain will discover whether it has the courage to face what it finds. The lights of the city flicker in the darkness. Somewhere, a survivor watches those lights and wonders if this is real, if justice will truly come, if the promises made today will be kept tomorrow. And somewhere in corridors of power and in quiet homes across the capital, others wonder the same thing. Can a broken system be fixed? Can lost trust be rebuilt? Can a city that failed its children find redemption? The answers won't come tonight, but the questions, urgent, unyielding, unavoidable, will not be silenced. London has been shaken. Now it must decide whether to crumble or rebuild.